All right, let's just get right into it. Today's explainer is tackling the Elon Musk versus OpenAI trial. But look, we are not going to treat this like some made-for-TV courtroom drama. If you've been following the AI space, you already know this trial was an absolute earthquake. But honestly, the real story isn't about who won or lost the lawsuit. It's actually a deep dive into the profound, deeply rooted institutional flaws of the organizations building the future of human technology. To really get what's going on, we have to look way past the daily headlines.
To guide us through this, we're relying entirely on a really fascinating special edition piece from Tech-Reader magazine, published back on May 24, 2026. The piece is called "The Moment Sam Altman Took the Oath," and it's written by Aaron Rose. Now, Aaron is a 40-year veteran tech reporter. He's been around the block, covering this industry for decades. So he brings this incredibly deep, historical perspective. He's not chasing the day-to-day Twitter gossip, He's looking strictly at the structural mechanics of how this whole thing went down.
And that brings us to this brilliant observation from Rose. He writes, "For months before the trial began, the narrative had a satisfying shape." Think about that. Before anyone even swore an oath, the public had basically already written the script. We all wanted a really clean, theatrical narrative, right? We wanted obvious heroes, and we absolutely wanted obvious villains. It's just human nature. We want massive, complex situations, especially when we're talking about the stakes of artificial general intelligence, to fit into neat little recognizable boxes.
So, what was that expected storyline? Well, it mapped out perfectly in the public consciousness. Step 1. Start as a pure nonprofit totally dedicated to humanity. Step 2. The reality of massive computing scale arrives, and it brings the money with it. Step 3. Introduce a capped profit structure so billions can flow in from partners like Microsoft, supposedly keeping the original mission safe. And finally, Step 4. The promises break, people get hurt, and suddenly the company is acting exactly like every other hyper-competitive Silicon Valley startup. That was the exact story everyone expected this trial to validate.
Right at the dead center of this expected narrative was, of course, Sam Altman. Leading up to his testimony, public opinion on him had completely hardened into two totally opposing camps. On one side, you've got the visionary executive, the guy almost single-handedly pushing AI to the frontier for ordinary folks. On the total flip side, you have the ambitious operator, the guy who quietly pivoted a safety-first nonprofit just to serve deep-pocketed investors. This massive split in opinion was basically set in stone after his wild, brief board ouster back in November 2023. Everyone tuning in thought the trial was going to definitively prove he was one or the other.
But here is the major pivot in Rose's analysis. He notes, what the trial record showed was not a cartoon villain. It also did not show a saint. When Altman actually took the stand, his testimony just completely shattered those prepackaged expectations. He definitely didn't come off as this pristine, flawless executive perfectly defending every move. But the cross-examination didn't uncover some dark, evil master plan either. Instead, what spilled out was something far messier, infinitely more complicated, and honestly, way more fascinating. To make sense of this mess, Rose introduces a really great metaphor. He calls OpenAI an institutional stew. His whole argument here is that OpenAI was literally never a single unified entity. From day one, it was an inherently unstable configuration. It was structurally built in a way that made deep internal conflict virtually inevitable. Think about it. You simply cannot throw entirely different operational models, massive capital requirements, and sweeping ideological missions into one pot and just hope it holds together peacefully when the heat gets turned up. Let's actually deconstruct this stew for a second. Imagine the ingredients bubbling in this pot. First, you have the safety believers, who legitimately feared that moving too fast could literally end in catastrophic existential disaster. Then, the ambitious researchers, deeply driven by the fact that they're building historically singular tech. Then come the executives, who are sweating the reality that rivals like Google and Meta are sprinting at extraordinary speeds. And finally, the investors, writing the billion-dollar checks required to even operate at this frontier, who, fairly enough, expect a reasonable return on their money. Every single one of these pressures is completely legitimate, but together, they are deeply structurally incompatible. So what exactly happens when all those incompatible pressures slam into each other? Well, you get a system where authority is distributed, but trust isn't. Because there was no central trust holding the organization together, when the crisis hit, the center just completely caved. Rose makes a crucial point here. The board firing Altman in November 2023 wasn't just some obvious act of bad faith. And the employees threatening to quit wasn't obvious bad faith either. Literally everyone was making cascading, split-second decisions under extreme external threats, acting totally reasonably based on their own motives, but they were trapped inside a fundamentally broken structure. Which brings us to a really fascinating critique of the media, and frankly, of us. Rose puts it bluntly.
Villain stories travel faster than institutional analyses. Why did everyone, the media included, latch onto the good versus evil angle so fast? Because, let's be honest, it's easy. It's so much more satisfying to point a finger at a singular genius or a singular fraud than it is to sit down and try to untangle this massive web of competing legitimate interests, structural contradictions, and governance failures.
This perfectly captures the huge divide in how the tech world gets covered. Coverage heavily rewards narrative clarity. Hunting down the heroes, the villains, the dramatic cautionary tales. What it rarely rewards is institutional accuracy. Because doing the work to examine structural contradictions, genuine uncertainty, and the completely entangled reality of a frontier industry, that's incredibly hard. The media totally missed the boat on the actual reality here because selling that simple narrative is just 1,000 times easier.
But to be fair, the media isn't entirely to blame here. OpenAI essentially set a trap for itself. Let's call it the aspirational trap. When your organization's core mission is insanely lofty, like claiming to build transformative tech for the benefit of all humanity, you are setting a standard that basically no institution run by actual human beings can ever consistently meet. Because of that sky-high standard, any normal commercial pivot didn't just feel like standard corporate strategy. To the ideologically driven employees who literally took pay cuts to be there, those pivots felt like deeply personal betrayal.
Now, strictly legally speaking, the aftermath of the trial was decisive. A unanimous jury verdict threw out all of Elon Musk's claims. Musk is currently appealing that decision to the Ninth Circuit. So yeah, the legal battles are absolutely going to continue playing out in court. But as this explainer's source material really drives home, that verdict doesn't solve the core issue. The legal outcomes are completely overshadowed by these massive, unresolved institutional questions that the tech industry is going to be stuck dealing with for the next 10 years.
And that leaves the whole industry staring down 3 massive structural questions. Here's the first one. How in the world do you maintain mission coherence when the capital requirements to stay at the frontier are effectively unlimited? Think about it. If your pure mission is safety and human benefit, but you literally need tens of billions of dollars just in computing power to stay in the ring with giant tech monopolies, how do you stop that massive flood of money from fundamentally mutating your mission? It's an almost impossible balancing act. And that financial paradox leads right into a huge governance paradox. How do you build a board capable of making excruciating decisions under extreme pressure when the people most qualified to be on that board are exactly the people who have conflicting interests? To govern frontier AI, you need experts who truly, deeply understand the tech. But those exact same experts are almost always financially or professionally tied up in the industry themselves. Finding someone who is brilliant enough to understand the stakes, but entirely impartial? Good luck with that.
Which brings us to the third and final structural question. How do you prevent capture by the accumulated weight of completely legitimate interests pulling in opposite directions? Notice the phrasing Rose uses here. The real threat to a humanity-focused institution isn't some hostile takeover by a cartoon supervillain. The actual threat is ideological and financial entanglement. It's the slow, quiet capture of the organization by the immense conflicting pressures of researchers, executives, and investors who all have their hands on the steering wheel at the exact same time.
Ultimately, Aaron Rose's autopsy leaves us with this sobering reality. Consequential leadership is really just complicated people inside deeply flawed institutions facing genuine uncertainty. This trial gave us an incredibly rare, completely unfiltered look at what actually happens when you build an institution on top of structural contradictions. Those contradictions don't just sit there quietly. They eventually explode into board crises, employee revolts, and massive public lawsuits. The people building the most powerful tech in human history, they aren't perfect heroes and they aren't evil villains. They're just humans, trying to navigate a hopelessly flawed structure.
I want to leave you with one final, totally provocative thought from the source material. If these really are just flawed institutions operating under conditions of immense, genuine uncertainty, is demanding moral clarity exactly the wrong question to ask? We all crave that clean story of good versus evil, right? Because it feels good. It's emotionally satisfying. But as we've seen in this explainer, when it comes to governing something as complex as frontier AI, demanding that simple moral clarity completely blinds us to the real structural challenges we desperately need to solve. So next time a massive tech headline drops, take a second to reconsider how you view the whole system. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this one.